All right, and we are back on live Wednesday water cooler Wednesday, if you will. And I'm
Hmm.
joined with Dwayne Gibbs there. Hey, bud, how you doing?
Hey man, how's it going?
It's going good. This is the Wednesday, the day after the elections. Elephant in the room, right, everybody? So I wanted to talk about a couple of things on that as far as impact goes, because Dwayne and I both go back around 30 years. And Dwayne, maybe not, I'm dating you maybe a little longer than, than I should. But for me, for sure, because I believe Reagan had just left office, maybe still in.
Hmm.
And then we're into the Bush administration, and then Clinton, and then Bush, and then Obama, and then Trump and Biden. I mean, so been through all the different presidents since then. And, it doesn't affect this industry that much. And that's what I want to focus on. I'm not going to make this a political commentary or
Yeah.
anything like that. That's not the purpose of this session. But politics does influence industries. I mean, there's no question about it because they can reset laws and they can do all sorts of things. So we do have to at least be aware of that. I like to focus on your own economy, versus trying to focus on the macro all the time. And I came across this quote, and Dwayne, I think you'll like this. I can't even recall where I got it from, but it says this: markets shouldn't dictate your outcomes. They should only dictate your strategies,
Right. Yeah.
you know? And I think that's really, really good for our industry because you've seen that as well. I mean, you've helped so many students get involved in this industry and watch them just take off. And when the market shifted, so what did you do? You shifted your strategies, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for the comment. I must have that baby face. So yes,
Yeah.
I remember all that. I would say this, at the end of the day, it's important to be aware of what's going on in the market always. And two,
Mhm.
you cannot one person change the market. And so I tell students all the time, the market, you have to change to market conditions. And you and I spoke before getting on that there are going to be changes made, regardless which way the election went. Changes were going to happen one
Mhm.
way or another. And so you just need to be aware of that. Um, and I think there's a lot of opportunity moving forward. And you just have to be aware of it. I mean, that's the biggest thing, and the conditions of what's going to happen in the real estate market all the way around is going to change.
Yeah, and politics from the president to the Senate to the House, they, they're the lawmakers, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to, and because of that, they can influence marketplaces. There's no
Right.
question about it, and you just have to understand that you just need to really look at that and identify where should you focus your energy. And this is whether you're in real estate or real estate notes or a combination of both. That's ultimately what it comes down to. So even on a big surface level, back with the real estate crash that we had starting in 2008, we had the real estate bubble, and then it imploded. Um, we were in a situation in this industry where non-performing loans was the place to be. I mean, the inventory was massive. We had 10 million people facing foreclosures. We had people that most of those 10 million, they owed more than their house was worth. And that was the market condition. So in the note industry, we said, well, that's a problem. And how can we help with that problem, come up with a solution, because it's in the solutions where you make your money. And that's what dictated our strategies, which was we can buy these loans that are not performing super cheap right now because the inventory is flooded. We can then work with people to help them stay in their homes, avoid foreclosure. And that's exactly what happened. And today, and really in the last, I say today, but really in the last 6, 7 years, the focus has totally shifted to performing loans because the inventory of non-performing loans is so minimal right now. But that's totally fine. There's great performing notes. By the way, some of those performing notes were not performing notes way back in 2009, 10, 11, 12. and those came back as really good investments. So just thinking in terms of performing and non-performing is a simple way to illustrate that you just change your strategy.
Yeah. So, I like to add to that, be, I would hear when I lived in Southwest Florida, down in the Fort Myers area, and we had the big crash. As you know, living in Florida, Florida was very much impacted in that whole 2000, in 8, 9, 10. And you were talking about how at one point it was a performing note now, and then it changed to a non-performing.
Mhm.
Markets do change and to where you can rebound from that. So I know a lot of people don't like change. However, I would say embrace it because the market's going to come back. It will come back. We've seen it time and time again. And, just be prepared for that. Just, for what you were saying.
Yeah, and you see sometimes in the people who learn one technique, um, and this happens a lot for real estate investors, just traditional real estate investors. They know one way to buy property, and they take that one technique and they try to pound that technique in every single market up that it doesn't work.
Right.
You've got to be loaded with multiple strategies. In the note business, that translates to understanding how to buy these things, at what price, but also what your exit strategies are. It's the whole it's the whole gamut. So to get into the micro of this, if you will, so general terms, performing, non-performing, that's pretty easy. But I know a lot of questions that I'm going to be getting in the very near future here because of the election, as people are going to start saying, well, what happens if mortgage rates change? What if they go up? What if they go down? Because ultimately, we really don't know what's going to happen. We're hoping that they go down. But big picture, again, when I first started in this business, people had mortgage interest rates of 18% through the Carter administration. So by comparison, 7% today sounds like a heck of a bargain. But people got used to the 2%, 3% cheap money loans. So 7% is like, oh my God, that's three times what we had before. So part of it's perspective, but um, interest rates on traditional mortgages really have zero impact on the note business. So I could really care less if traditional bank mortgage interest rates go up or go down. On a personal business investment level in this industry, it really has zero impact. Why? Because we don't buy performing notes from banks. Why don't we buy performing notes from banks? Because they don't sell them. They only sell the non-performing notes. Now, here's the thing. The reality is the banks don't even own the performing notes. They service them. Fannie Mae owns them, okay? So without having to go into all that detail, Fannie Mae does not sell performing notes. They only sell non-performing notes. So once a note goes non-performing, there's only a couple of things that can happen. Fannie Mae sells that note, and it's either worked out again. They do some kind of a loan modification, some kind of a forbearance, or some kind of a workout. The person signs the property over through a deed in lieu, or they get foreclosed upon. And those are really going to be, there's techniques within each of those, but those are the three main things that can happen. So whatever interest rate was on that loan, it doesn't matter if it's a non-performing note anymore, because we start over and refashion a loan that works.
Yes. Yep.
The mortgage interest rate also doesn't affect us because part of our inventory is buying seller financed loans. And seller finance loans are never at mortgage interest rates, or shouldn't be if you're creating one, because you're taking on more risk than a bank. So traditionally, you'll see seller finance loans, business to consumer, in around the 10% range. Business to business can be upwards in the 12% range. So again, whatever the banks are charging is irrelevant, because if we're dealing in seller financing, we're not a bank, number one, so we're not held to the same regulations, and we're taking on more risk. How do I know we're taking on more risk? Because if somebody could get cheaper money, they'd get cheaper money.
Yes.
Right? So that's what it comes down to, everybody. So the mortgage interest rates, it doesn't really affect us at all. So if that's one of the things you're concerned about because of who's in charge of the government and what they're doing and how they're working with the Fed and all those sorts of things. It doesn't matter, at least in our industry. The next one is I don't know why that popped there. I had another one in between. It'll come up later, I guess. I might have put these out of order. Bank performance. You know, there are some banks that are failing and have failed this past year. And we had the same thing, banks failing back in the last crash. Of course, it was much more significant back then. The banks that have crashed now, for slightly different reasons, ultimately the government comes in and bails them out. At least that's what historically is what's happened. But for us, again, bank performance doesn't have an effect on the note investing industry. If it does have an effect, the effect would be more of a positive one for us, because if a bank is going out of business because of the amount of non-performing loans that they have on their books, that becomes inventory for us. So there's a net positive there. Most banks today are not in trouble for that. They really are in trouble because they have unrecognized losses in the treasury market. And that's a big problem that will not be resolved until interest rates go down, if they overall go down. Because again, we don't buy notes from banks. And Dwayne, you and I know there's a couple of people, at least in this industry, that are teaching people from the premise of you buy these loans from bank and you build a relationship from a bank. I've said this all the time.
I hear. Yeah, sorry, I didn't. There was an overlap. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yes, the preconceived notion is I can go down to my local bank and go in there and just say, okay, what do you have for non-performing notes that I want to go ahead and buy it? And the first thing they're going to tell you is, we don't have any. And oh, sure, somebody told me that, you know, I have somebody that's educating me and I'm paying them and they're telling me just to come down here and ask for non-performing notes, and you guys have those, I could buy them from you. That's totally absurd. That's not how it works.
Yeah. And to put a point on that, we've both been in this industry a long time, trained more people than anybody. And can you name one person that has become successful in this industry by just focusing on buying from banks?
No.
I can't either.
No.
You know why, everybody?
I don't know if I spit out no fast enough for you, but
because
no.
they don't exist, everybody. They don't
right.
exist. I don't care who's telling you this is the secret. You go and build these relationships with banks. It doesn't work that way. Look,
No.
when you really pull the curtain behind the banks, you can break it into there's portfolio lenders and non-portfolio lenders. Most banks are non-portfolio lenders. And what that means is when they create a mortgage, they immediately, before the first payment's even made, before the ink is dry, they immediately sell that loan to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or Ginnie Mae. That's how it works. Why did they do that? They get cashed out. They do another loan. They make their points. They sell it. And then they make their money by retaining the servicing rights. That's how it works. You don't see that because they're the face of Fannie Mae.
Well, that's who you go to. You go into the bank, you deal with the bank lender, you fill out the paperwork, you have to pay them. You're not dealing with Fannie Mae. So, you know, of course, people don't understand that. They think, oh no, I went down to Bank of America and I gave the guy money and I did my closing and I did it right there. And of course well, it's just uneducated. That's all.
And you make your payments there. Sure.
That's right.
The other lenders are portfolio lenders. And these are credit unions, small banks. And they'll hold the portfolio comes from, they'll do loans and hold them in their own portfolio. It used to be the old S&L, savings and loans. But those are so few and far between, and they really do a combination of portfolio and non-portfolio, even at a smaller bank level. So they just don't hold these notes. And you know, trying to wait and work with a bank that, you know, and say, oh, well, if you have these not performing, or if a bank is failing, it's like, hey, I can come in and buy those notes. It just doesn't work that way, everybody. It just absolutely doesn't, because you buying one note from a bank that's failing doesn't do anything. If they've got $200 million in non-performing loans and they're going to be absorbed by another bank because of that, you coming in and trying to buy one $30,000 loan from them, it's not worth their time and
Yeah.
effort. So bank performance overall is not going to affect us. However, it could be a net positive if those banks are in trouble like they were the last time because of non-performing bank loans. But I don't see that this go around. There's the one.
There it is.
Yeah, popped up out of order. I must have moved it around at the end. Real estate prices. I get asked about this all the time too. Well, what happens if, real estate prices drop? Are we in another bubble and that sort of thing? And again, part of that is government control because, they work with the Fed's independent. I get it, but they set interest rates and there's policy and there's pressure and there's things that can happen here. Okay. So that could affect real estate prices. A bubble, so to speak, could burst because even though we have higher interest rates, real estate prices have continued to grow. Well, it's continued to grow because there's less inventory. So real estate all being local, but if we think on it as on a national basis, if the property values go down, does that affect the note industry? Okay. It depends how far down the prices go. Because when we buy notes, if you're doing it the right way, like if you're a client of mine, the maximum investment to value ratio that I use. I would never be in a deal any more than that number based upon the value of the property. And there's reasons for that. If I have to take the property back, I still want to maintain a profit margin. The other reason is it buffers you from property values going down. I don't have a single client right now that would be in trouble. And by in trouble, I mean their note is worth more than the property all of a sudden. In other words, the property's now worth 80,000, but the people owe 100 grand. They're underwater, they're upside down. I don't have a single client that there's got to be even at a 30% drop in real estate prices. I don't have a single client that'll be in that position. And if we have a 30% decline in real estate prices, we've got a whole lot of other mess going on.
Well,
It's just unrealistic to think in terms of that big of a drop. I'm not saying it's impossible. It happened before in the other crash, but they've got buffers and they've got new things to prevent that from happening again. So real estate prices and fluctuations, 10% or so, it doesn't affect us. 20% or so doesn't affect us. If it's greater than 30%, it does affect us. But at the same time, the person owes on the debt. They have to live somewhere. So they continue to pay the debt. We can modify a loan. So again, I can go back to that slide that said it just dictates our strategies. If we have an occasion like that, we say, well, the people will either continue to pay. I'll do a temporary loan modification for them if I need to do it to keep the cash flow coming in. So it might affect our yield a little bit temporarily, but overall, our investment is still safe. We still have leverage on the property. And, that's just a direct result of the marketplace right now with the properties going up.
yeah, and I think that just comes from our experience over the years of educating people. There are people that I know that are teaching less margin, and if something goes wrong, like with what you're saying, they really helped them get into a bad deal, unlike the training that we're giving them and that you're working with your students one-on-one. I mean, you factor in all that. Okay, what happens if the market just really takes a big crash? Or let's look at how much meat is on the bone and we can buy it. It may look good, but after you've done the math and run through the scenarios, I know that you had a situation not long ago where a student come to you and they thought it was good, and you kind of had obviously your knowledge and intuition was, well, let's really peel back the onion a little bit and look at this particular deal, and it wound up being wasn't a good deal to buy. And so, thank goodness they listened to you, and they did.
Yeah, and what you're touching on is the thought process of looking at return first and not risk. That's a mistake. We always look at risk first, then return.
That's right.
And that happens where some people, we always say they're hunting down the yield. So if you've got, for example, everybody, $100,000 house and somebody just pay, let's say an investor owns it free and clear and somebody gives them $5,000 down. So they create a $95,000 note. And let's say they create that note at 12%. Okay. And you come in and you say, all right, I'll buy that $95,000 note at $92,000. And I'm going to make a 14% return on that. Great. Good return. I agree with you, 14%. But the point being, what if they default, number one? Number two, the real estate prices go down. In that case, you're way, way, way too tight. If that person defaults, walks away because maybe prices did go down, guess what? You just paid $92,000 for a $90,000 house. That's
Yeah.
you get the house back. Well, congratulations. You paid 92 grand for now a $90,000 house. It makes no sense at all. So you have to build in the risk first, and then you look at the reward. And if we have to, we can modify prices or walk away from deals where we don't have a good risk reward relationship in that. So real estate prices, not a concern, at least in the near future, regardless of who's setting up the rules and regulations. Default rate. This is another one I get asked about a lot, and I'm anticipating even more questions like that. What if, new administration comes in and does this, that, and the other, and the default rate goes up? For example, right now, our default rate is much higher than what's being reported, much higher. Why? Because, again, it comes back to the fact that 90 plus, and I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's darn near close to 98%, but I'll say 90 plus. 90 plus percent of all loans, bank loans originated in this country, are owned by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and Ginnie Mae. And because of the Dodd-Frank Act from the last crash, they can hold banks more responsible if the loans go into default, and to a point where they can force the banks to take them back. Now, banks can't afford to take those loans back and put them on their books as non-performing loans because that triggers penalties and everything else. So there's this delicate balance here where Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac have enormous pressure on banks to keep those loans from going into default. So what do? Of all the loans that have fallen back behind in payments, 70 some odd percent of them have gone through loan modifications with the bank. And that doesn't meet the headlines because the underlying factor of those modifications is because people are struggling and the default rate has gone up. How do we disguise, and I'm not saying they're doing that intentionally, but how do we keep people from losing their houses would be the face of it. But really, how do we disguise that? Well, you go in and you force these banks to do modifications that they otherwise would not have done. Why would they do that? Because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the taxpayers, it's their money. It's the taxpayers' money that's supporting all of that. So it kind of gets washed in the thing. The banks are off the hook. All the banks have to do is the modification and go, we don't have to take that one back and have it on our books and have to try to work with people and have all these penalties from Dodd-Frank. That's what's happening behind the scene. So what if they come in and they change that and say, hey, no, these banks are still writing bad loans, okay, which they are. They call it subprime something different now, non-bank loans, they like to call them. But they're writing loans that people are going to ultimately fail on. But because of the way the system is right now, keeping those off the books, working with people, stretching out loans, doing what have you. If they come in and say, enough of that nonsense, the taxpayers are paying for all this stuff for people because you're writing bad loans, banks, you got to take those things back. Then it goes back to bank performance, bank failure, and those other things. The real default rate will come out. They'll stop working on these modifications at that level, and they'll have to sell those notes. And
yeah, banks don't want to take those loans back.
No, they can't afford to.
So
They'll
they
go out
can't
of business.
afford to. Then they have a buying power to where that gets lowered of what kind of the amount of loans they're able to push out. And well, we all know banks make their money off of the interest and the points and all that is being charged. So they definitely tighten up the reins on all that.
Sure. because again, a big part of that is that balance of, man, you're right. We can't write more loans right now because if we can't modify these other ones and Fannie Mae forces these on us, we're done. We
Yeah,
have to
what are
have
we
cash.
gonna
We
do?
have to have a cash reserve to work on these things. And they would have to hire people for loss mitigation, which banks
Yeah,
don't have big loss mitigation departments anymore. I mean, it'd be a
that's right.
tremendous output for them, and they just couldn't handle it.
Yeah,
So that's why, that hasn't happened. But you never know if they're coming in and cutting costs and that sort of thing, and cutting back, on government expenses. This one's a big leak, and I could see them coming in and doing that and pushing that back on the banks. The banks couldn't afford it; they'll sell it, and again, that would be a net positive for us because what do? We would switch our technique from not so much performing to buying up these defaulted loans.
that's right.
It just makes sense. So again, the markets don't dictate the outcomes, but your strategies do. That's what you do. You look at the market and you adjust to that. So any
Can
new
I
rules?
add something to
Yeah,
that real
sure.
fast? Just
Yep.
on a student base, client base, so to say. They say, what should I focus on, performing or non-performing? And what I used to always say is you need to know both sides of the business. It's like kind of like having a black belt in karate. There's always a counter move that you can do. And if you have a performing note that goes bad, well, you know how to work it out. If you buy a non-performing asset and how to work it out, that's completely different. And
Mhm.
so having knowledge on both sides of the space, I think not putting all your eggs in one basket definitely is going to help you overall with the performance of your assets.
Yeah, 100% with you on that. There's such it's I'm always still puzzled. There's another person in the industry that just teaches non-performing.
That's
It's
it.
like,
That's it.
what are you doing?
I don't get it.
First of all, you don't have a lot of inventory right now, and secondly, you're passing up so much other. I don't get it. So the note business includes all of that.
Yeah.
Performing,
And
non-performing,
vice
all of it.
versa.
Gotta
Just
know it.
just
Yeah.
doing vice versa, just doing performing isn't always good either.
No, of course, yeah, because if a note goes bad, and you're like, well, what do I do now? It's like,
That's
really,
right.
you hadn't thought about that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. That
Anyway,
happens.
so new rules and regulations. What's going to happen in the next 4 years or so? What's going to happen in the next first couple of months of 2025? Nobody really knows. Are there going to be less rules, more rules? Are they going to change them? And the reality is we don't know. But again, what effect is it going to have on our industry? We've been, even with Dodd-Frank, which is a big part, a big piece of legislation. Dodd-Frank was so flawed because again, they write these enormous amount, the phone book, phone book. Everybody remember what a phone book was?
Probably a third of our listeners.
Yeah, right. So, a book, of laws,
Do you
that's a,
remember having two phone books? One yellow, one
oh
white.
yeah, I had the yellow pages and the white
Yeah.
pages. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
I'm sure some are saying, what is he talking about?
I remember,
Off topic, I saw a video the other day on social media, and it was a father in the dining room, and they sat his kids down, and he had a rotary phone and sat it on the table and had a box over it. He says, listen, we're gonna play a game. Whoever can make this happen, you're gonna win. I think he had $20 there, and
yeah.
all. So they were sitting there, and he pulled it up, and all the kids looked at one another like, what do you got? What do you got here? And to see them try and dial, and oh no, they all had a theory on how it worked, and it was a little bit of humor I throw in,
Yeah.
but I thought it was kind of funny.
Yeah, I know. I think Jim Gaffigan had a routine. I can't remember, of course, the whole thing, but he was talking about those phones and he goes, oh, and then, if you had a friend with two zeros in their phone number, you just never called them.
It took an hour to make a call.
Oh man. All right. Anyway,
All right, back here we are.
so when you have legislation, that's 12 inches thick, there's a lot of things in there that have unintended consequences. And some of the rules and regulations in Dodd-Frank, in the initial interpretation of it, they actually made selling your own home with financing illegal. Now, that was unintended. They went back and corrected that because that was not the intent of the legislation. The intent of the legislation was to prevent banks from setting people up for failure by writing, bad loans or high risk loans. But that was one of the repercussions of it. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And so they came back and they corrected that because, the fact that an individual in the United States can sell private property on terms or for cash, you can't impede upon that. That's getting into constitutional law and things like that. So seller financing, whether it's to another business to business or business to consumer, is pretty well insulated from the rules and regulations that other licensed FDIC insured entities, banks, mortgage companies, and non-banks that are lenders, that they will have. So it won't really affect us. I think what will affect us in the future here, because it's starting to grow, is debt collectors licenses. And that's one thing that's growing throughout the United States. Who has the right to collect debt and those sorts of things? I don't agree with some of the regulations and such that they're putting in place for that. Part of it seems to me to be a money grab, just another license that a state can charge and those sorts of things. But nonetheless, it is a reality and it's starting to grow. But what happens? Our industry is modifying. We've got servicing companies that go ahead and get debt collectors licensed because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are taking action on that. And that means that we don't have to get a license ourselves. Could that change and they start to put in things? I don't think so. Because again, you should have at least the right to sell your own home with financing. Should you have the right to do that with an investment property that you own? 100%.
North Carolina, here where I live, is terrible. It's expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, that's why some servicing companies pulled out of Carolina,
Yeah.
But
I mean,
what happens is, of course,
terrible.
some pull out and the others go, oh, well, there's an opportunity there. We have to pay a little cost to it. And I hope they're going to cut some of these rules and regulations, but I was out in Reno talking with the servicing company out there. And one thing I really hadn't thought of, I don't know why, but I
What
was
did he
talking
say
about,
about that when you were up there?
well, the cost for servicing has ticked up $5. Now, that's not really a lot considering they haven't changed the prices in 20 years, for servicing.
Yeah.
So going up $5 is not a big deal, but it was something where I saw one company do it and then others, followed suit. And it's like, I get that. But what's the deal? He goes, rules and regulations. He goes, we have to get debt collectors licenses now. And he goes, we're licensed in every state. I have to do continuing education in every state about every 2 years.
Nuts. That's nuts.
Can you imagine that? You're trying to run a business and you have to go through these, these other courses.
It's like being a real estate agent in every state and having to maintain your license and your training.
I mean, you would almost have to hire somebody full time just to continue to do that. So not only do they have servicing company licensing and everything else, but the debt collectors now is a big thing. So, okay, yes, some of these things can possibly increase the cost of our business, but again, $5 in 20 something years, that's not a big increase. And again, we have the ability to negotiate to our yield by including those additional fees. And what we're seeing more of is people are learning to create notes the right way. They're learning to do seller financing the right way. And I believe we have definitely, you and I personally have played a big role in that. And it's smart. If you're ever going to do seller financing, create a good quality note that has a good resale value. And there's things that you need to do and be aware of that, because if you create a crap note, it's going to be worth crap. I'll tell you that right now. And then you hear that all the time. People go, oh, the discounts are so big in your industry. It's like, no, you created a terrible note, so you're going to get a terrible price. Create a good quality note and you won't have that big of a discount there. So one of the things that people with seller financing are doing today is they're adding in your payment's no longer principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. It's principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and servicing. So they've added that on there and put that burden onto the consumer, who's the borrower. Hey, you want to get the money, you got to pay to have it serviced.
Yeah, seller financing is just filling a void that conventional financing couldn't provide for you.
Mhm.
So, you couldn't qualify for a loan. Banks look at, your credit rating, they give you a rate that you qualify for. And so no different than seller financing. Well, Joe Smith couldn't qualify for conventional, so we can do seller finance for him. And, he's going to pay more for it. He's going to pay more for that note than he going to conventional financing. So I you need to write good paper. I mean,
Yeah.
if you want to go sell it on a secondary market, if you're not writing good paper, you will realize that once you go to sell that paper, that you're going to have somebody that knows probably a little bit more than you do, and realize as well, you wrote some bad paper. You should have done this, and what you did is you bought yourself some education. Is what you did.
Yeah, and of course we help people with that as well, education wise and everything else. We got a lot of clients who are doing that. But one more thing on the fees, um, adding that into a seller finance note. I mean, how many places do you see today that charge you a convenience fee?
Yeah.
For it's the same thing. They're passing along a new cost that somebody's put on there, and they'll call it various various things. I always love the convenience fees. Like, wait a minute, I'm making it easier for you, and somehow I'm paying you a convenience
Yeah.
fee. I don't get,
We used to
you know.
see that, didn't we, on hotels? We'd stay at hotels. Well, we have a maintenance fee. Well, wait a minute, I didn't have maintenance come to my room, so now I have a maintenance fee and a hotel fee and a
Yeah,
concierge fee and a lobby fee. Yeah, it just seemed like they were hitting you with all kinds of taxes to
yeah,
make up for somewhere else. Yeah, it
absolutely.
happens all across the industry, doesn't it?
Yeah. So that's what we got for you today, everybody. So look, regardless of what your thoughts, opinions are, administration changes, House, Senate, we're going to see how all that stuff works out. Man, drill it down to your individual economy. And if you're in this industry, I'm telling you, it's not going to have any big impact on you at all. If anything, as by going through those, there may be a net positive in the industry. But again,
Mm.
we'll just adapt the strategies, and that's what I'm here to do. And Dwayne and I have been through all these different administrations and the various rules and regulations and good markets, bad markets. And guess what? We're still here, we're still thriving, and
Yes.
we're still making people a lot of money. So if you're still on the fence about this industry, and now you've got you really thinking like, oh boy, no, this is going to be the place to be. It's one of the safest places in real estate, and it's all about cash flow, making money while you sleep, and that's the name of the game. And our returns, I would put our returns up against any segment in investing right now. If you look at safety and returns, I just think you've got to consider where we are, because I think we're number one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, everybody. Remember, we'll have the video up on the YouTube channel if you'd rather watch the video. There, I'll also have the audio on the podcast, Real Estate Without Renters. And if you have questions for us, please go ahead and email us if you're interested in working with us and getting you into these deals. I mean, we had, gosh, not to get sidetracked, we had over 10 closings this past week, and I would say 7 or 8 of them were all brand new students, been with me less than a month. So if you're looking for a good investment and good people to work with, send us an email, info at kevinshortell.com. That's
Yeah.
KEVINSHORTLE.com. We'll even send you a link to get on the phone and talk with Dwayne, talk about the business, talk about what we can do to help you accomplish these goals, because boy, there's
Or if they
plenty of
just have a
opportunity.
question, anything that they're hearing, they, maybe conflicting stories, by all means, send an email in.
Yeah, sounds good. So thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you again on another Water Cooler Wednesday next week.
Yep. See ya.